This is The Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral.com.
Good morning, Tuscaloosa, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening or watching the Joe Gaither Show on BamaCentral and BamaCentral.com. Of course, I am Joe Gaither. You are the listener, the viewer, watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter at Joe Gaither6 or on the BamaCentral YouTube channel. We appreciate everybody who has checked us out on those platforms. Or you might be listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on Amazon. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on those platforms. You can give us a comment, question, query, or complaint at Joe Gaither6. I hope you guys are having a happy 4th of July week. I know tomorrow is going to be a big day of celebration. But before all that, we're going to talk some Alabama basketball. And to do so, we're bringing in our expert, Blake Byler. Blake Byler, BamaCentral.com. You follow him already at Blake Byler 45 for all of his great coverage. Blake, it's been a minute, man. How's your summer going?
It's going well, Joe. How about you?
Oh, pretty good. Excited for July. We're, 59, 58 days away from Alabama football kicking off. So everything's coming quickly. I saw last night our friend Ryan Fowler reporting that Alabama football's fall camp is going to start on the 29th of this month. They will report on the 29th, and the guys will get going on the 30th. So it's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, it's getting close.
Well, Blake, there's a lot of other exciting things. I mean, everybody's excited for football, but really, I think you and I might be more excited for this Alabama basketball season. And you've been doing a lot of great work for BamaCentral.com. So I wanted to bring you on to talk about your series. This is the second year, correct me, second year or third?
Third, yeah.
Oh, pain. It's the third year of the Alabama Basketball Newcomer series that you have been working on. And right now, you guys can go to BamaCentral.com and check out the first 4 editions. There are 8 newcomers, and Blake will be breaking down the next 4 in the next 4 weeks. But he has already broken down the first 4 transfers of Alabama basketball's newcomers. You can check it out right now. Aiden Sherrill, Cliff Omoruyi, Chris Youngblood, and Houston Mallette are all up there, profiles on each of their games. And so I wanted to talk to you about those guys and really what they are going to add to Nate Oates' Crimson Tide. Sounds like a plan?
Sounds great.
All right, so you started. Let's work backwards because we'll work from last week all the way to the first guy. You started with Houston. You started with Cliff Omoruyi, and you went all the way through. Last week you did Houston Mallette, and so I'm catching up. I'm reading up on Houston Mallette. Houston Mallette, the first transferee. Is that the right word? Transferee into Alabama. And he transferred, or he made his decision to transfer while Alabama basketball was still competing this season. Let's talk about what makes him special and really what makes him a good fit for Alabama. What did you see out of him that makes him a perfect player for the Nate Oates system?
Yeah, well, I think for one, it was really interesting that he did commit to Alabama while the season was still going on, and it also wasn't during Alabama's Final Four run. It was really before then, kind of right after they had lost in the first round of the SEC tournament, which marked, I think, their third loss in 4 games down the stretch of the season, or 4th loss in 6 games, something around there. And so Alabama basketball wasn't really trending upward when Houston Mallette decided to join the team. So that tells me a lot about his commitment to the program and his belief in Alabama's system, that it was before this Final Four run that's really vaulted Alabama up into the national spotlight as far as relevancy in college basketball goes. So I think that's an important piece of information. But as far as his game itself, he's a 6'5" guard, about 200 pounds. He's long. He's a decent defender. I don't think he is necessarily going to be guarding the other team's best player, but I think he's a good team defender, and that he plays well off the ball, and that he can be a guy who is a good defender on a team's second or third best player, one of their guards, and somebody who's long and can disrupt things that way. As far as offensively, he shoots 40% from 3. He did that last season, and we know 3-point shooting is pretty important when it comes to Nate Oates' offense. And he's a player that can catch and shoot really well. He can create his own shot, but that's not what he does most often. That will certainly help him stay on the floor, being able to create his own shot. But as far as catch and shoot, his numbers were great. And he's just a player who can kind of fill in the come off the bench 3-and-D type role that really is valuable to anybody, but especially in Nate Oates' system, wherever he prides himself on having guys that can play defense on top of guys that can shoot the three. He's going to get a lot of looks just sprinting to the corner in transition. He's going to get a lot of looks spotting up on the wings or in the corners from penetrations from Mark Sears or whatever other guard is in the game. And he's going to benefit a lot from that. And I don't know if he's necessarily a guy that's going to command 25, 30 minutes a game. I think his role will be a little more similar to somebody who plays maybe 15 minutes a game. But in those 15, he comes off the bench and hits 2 threes and has 2 steals and is able to really impact the game in the shorter amount of time that he's in the game. And obviously we don't know exactly how the rotations are going to shake out, but I think that's the kind of player that he can be. And I think he embraces that too. He's kind of got the unorthodox jersey number of 95. Right. And so now you can wear any jersey number in college basketball. You used to only be able to wear digits 0 through 5. So 55 was the highest you can go. Now he's wearing 95. And in an interview with Tide Illustrated, I believe, he said that the reason he wears 95 is kind of a mentality that his Pepperdine coach instilled in him, and that 95% of the time when you play, you don't have the ball in your hands. And that kind of shows the type of selfless, trying to impact winning player that he is, that he knows he's not going to have the ball. He's not going to be a ball dominant player, but he still wants to do what's necessary to help the team win. And I think that's exactly what he's going to be for Alabama, no matter how large or small of a role that is.
All right, so does the meaning behind the number, we'll just go straight to that, does the meaning behind the number outweigh the ugly aesthetic of 95 on a jersey for you, Blake, as a basketball fan?
You know, I think it's cool. I'm also an NBA fan, and people have been wearing weird numbers in the NBA forever.
77.
I mean, yeah, Luka wears 77. Like, dudes wear numbers in the 90s all the time. It's kind of weird for college basketball, but, like, it doesn't bother me too much, to be honest.
Okay. I'm being a stick in the mud. It's not going to bother me at all. But right now in the summer when there's nothing to talk about, it's like that is ugly a choice. And you're going to see, you know what? A lot of Alabama fans will be buying uniforms, with that 95. If you're coming in at the bench, if you're coming in 12 minutes a game, popping up a couple threes and playing solid defense, people will love you here in Tuscaloosa. My other question about Houston Mallette is, okay, couple of years at Pepperdine, lower level. How do you expect, or do you expect there to be trouble or difficulty translating from, okay, smaller league, smaller conference, not as many eyes, to every eye is on you in the SEC, and really every night, every game in the SEC is going to be pretty highly contested, so the competition much higher in the SEC. Do you have any concerns translating from Pepperdine to Alabama?
I think it'll definitely be a learning curve because he has spent 3 years at Pepperdine, and he's played decent teams over there because that's the league Gonzaga's in. But that's not every night. Usually they're playing like Portland or somebody like that. So I definitely think there will be a learning curve that comes with that. But I also think he's not going to be asked to handle a large percentage of the load when it comes to scoring or defending. Like, he's going to have a chance to learn and adapt kind of as the season goes on, because he's not going to be given those kind of major responsibilities. Like, I think about last year, how it kind of took Grant Nelson a little while to get adapted to the physicality of the SEC, but Nelson was handed a much larger portion of responsibilities offensively and defensively. So I don't think it's going to be too much of a problem for the team if he does have a learning curve. I think that with his likely role, that there's going to be breathing room and time for that level of adaptation to come.
Perfect. Well, let's keep it tight and we'll move on to the next transfer. We'll keep working backwards. 2 weeks ago, you wrote about maybe the most talked about transfer, Aiden Holloway. Transfers across the state from Auburn to Alabama. And, every time his name gets dropped on social media, oh my gosh, it's just left and right. The Iron Bowl of basketball goes back and forth. what's our expectation for Aiden Holloway? And really, with that, I'm going to put a second question on the back end. What's the biggest misconception about Aiden Holloway and his game? Because I think there's a lot of, oh, he isn't this, he is that. You tell us, what's the biggest misconception about Aiden Holloway's game?
Those are two good questions. I'll start with the expectations. I really don't think there should be any. Like, I think this is a player where you go in and it's almost like a house money type ad, especially with bringing back Mark Sears. So knowing that you have Sears as the starting point guard and that he's going to play 30 minutes a game, maybe 35 because Oates is psychotic and he just likes to play his best players that much. You don't need Holloway to be a starting point guard caliber player. Now, I think he can be that, is the thing. Obviously, former McDonald's All-American, really talented high school player, and then he goes to Auburn, and he struggles. He was the starter for probably 80% of this season. They started Trey Donaldson a couple of games there, but he struggled. He didn't shoot well from the floor at all. He didn't shoot well from three at all. He was about 30% from the floor, which is atrocious. And then he was about 28% from three. But you saw in a bunch of different games that the talent was there. And you could see games, for example, the season opener against Baylor. I remember he had a really good game against Georgia in SEC play where you're like, okay, this is why he was a five-star recruit. This is why he was a McDonald's All-American. I think confidence was a really big issue with him. And as the season progressed, especially as a freshman, if you lose your confidence, it's really hard to build back up. And so I think that's why he has opted for a change of scenery. I think in high school, he was a really, really, really good three-point shooter. Honestly, this is probably the biggest misconception, is that he's a bad three-point shooter because all of the numbers that we have to go off of in college say that he's not very good. I mean, 28% is not great. But what a lot of people don't know is coming out of high school, he was one of the most prolific shooters in the entire 2023 class. He had some of the best percentages in high school. He had some of the best percentages in EYBL and all things of that nature. So I think what he needs is a lot of really, I thought his problem shooting was shot selection. And a lot of his shots were coming off the dribble, movement coming off screens, but a lot of off balance looks. I was even in Spokane where Alabama played their first two NCAA tournament games. And at the same time, Auburn was playing against Yale. They happened to get put in the same region. And so for the second half of the Auburn-Yale game, I ended up sitting next to some San Diego State scouts because they had beaten UAB and they were scouting for the winner of Auburn and Yale. And Holloway took a couple of bad shots, and one of them turned to me and they were like, this kid takes terrible shots like that. Like even opposing team scouts kind of knew that about his tendencies in Auburn's offense. But I think he's a point guard, but I think he's going to be able to play off the ball a little bit at Alabama. And I think one thing that he's going to get a lot of is a lot of catch and shoot looks, because even though Mark Sears is the point guard and he's dominant, he gets a lot of catch and shoot looks from guys driving and kicking. And I think for a shooter who's trying to regain their confidence, getting a lot of open catch and shoot looks out of defenses that collapse is going to be huge. And I think that's going to help him kind of reinvent his confidence and his game. And I think that's going to be huge for him. And he's just one of those guys where if he pops and if he ends up being really good, that's just another added weapon for Alabama on this team. And if it doesn't work out, there's really no harm done because you still have an All-American and maybe the best player in the country in Mark Sears running the show at point guard.
One thing that's very pivotal, or one of the main concepts in Alabama's offense, is the drive, is the dribble drive, and then you got to kick it out. So let's talk about Aiden Holloway's ability to get to the rim and finishing at the rim, and then really how. You've seen it a lot over the last couple of weeks when you've seen these snippets of practice clips, and we're only getting snippets, but every single time seems to include a dribble drive with a lob to a finisher. We'll talk about Cliff Omoruyi in a minute, but Aiden Holloway's ability to, I'm going to get into the lane, I'm going to get into the paint, and either I'm going to finish at the rim or I'm going to have a successful pass off to a big man who's going to make an easy finish. How do you feel like even with the struggles that he had at Auburn, that he'll be able to, implement that or continue to really use that in his game.
He's got a quick first step, which is going to be huge for him being able to get by defenders. He's got a nice handle. I think he's a really talented passer, and I think that's what we've seen a lot in a lot of these, practice clips and highlights. He had one pass where he drove into the lane and threw one like behind his head almost to Omoruyi. But I think his finishing needs work. It wasn't up to par for what you would want it to be last season at Auburn, but also he's got Mark Sears to learn from when it comes to finishing, and also the Alabama staff. Mark Sears had an incredible jump in terms of his finishing production over his 2 years at Alabama, soon to be 3. And now he finishes everything around the rim. And I think that's something that can develop. And if his finishing gets better, he's going to be that much better. But he's able to make really good passes. And I think that's important because he's going to be able to hit Omoruyi or Sherrell or whoever for a dump off, where he's going to be able to kick it out. That's going to be an important part of his game, because if he can't make the right passes and he can't finish, it's going to be harder to keep him on the floor, because that is such an important part of the Alabama offense, especially if he's running point guard when Mark Sears is out of the game or anything like that. But that is a really important part and something that I think he can improve at, but he's going to need to in order to get more playing time.
We're talking to Blake Byler, BamaCentral's basketball expert. You're following him at Blake Byler 45, and we're having him on the Joe Gaither Show to talk about his Alabama Basketball Newcomer Series. He's halfway through the Newcomer Series. You can read it at BamaCentral.com. Profiles on all 4 transferees. He will spend the next month profiling the freshmen, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But let's continue on the transferees. Chris Youngblood, a Tuscaloosa native, moves out of Tuscaloosa before really high school basketball, but you pull him in from I always get it confused. USF, not UCF. And you pull him in from USF, and really, I have seen you very, very highly on Chris Youngblood. A lot of people are putting their hypothetical starting 5 lineups out there, and many people are not including Chris Youngblood, but I've seen you pretty routinely think, okay, this guy's going to be a starter, whether he's starting every single game or most of the games, he's going to be considered a starter. What's Alabama getting in Chris Youngblood?
I think he's a starter caliber player, and I think he's going to play starter minutes, whether he's in the starting 5 or being the first guy off the bench. And he's a really strong player. I mean, I even tweeted yesterday that they've updated some weights on the official roster, and he's up to 223 pounds at 6'4". So he's got a very bulky build for a guard. He's a really good shooter. He shot 40% for 3 straight seasons, dating back to his sophomore year at Kennesaw State. He played 3 years at Kennesaw State. Then his coach left, went to USF, and he followed his coach to USF. So last 3 seasons, he shot 40% from 3. He's a good finisher, and he's also a really good defender. And I've even seen South Florida fans on Twitter talking about how Alabama fans, South Florida fans are interacting on Twitter. Alabama fans being like, hey, what are we getting with Chris Youngblood? There were South Florida fans that were like, he's like a bulldog. Like, he was guarding the other team's best player every night. He gives 100%. He's a hustle player. He's going to dive for loose balls. He's a blue-collar type player that Nate Oates loves. And so really everything about him fits perfectly with what Alabama loves to do. Great shooter, bulldog-like defender, hustle player. He checks all of the boxes. And then kind of on top of that, all of kind of the talk and his reputation is that he's a fantastic leader. And I think that's also really important when it comes to this Alabama team. They're really old. There are a lot of seniors on this roster, but there aren't a ton of returning players. Obviously, there's Mark Sears. But the other returners are Jaron Stevenson, who's a sophomore. Grant Nelson's a senior. But then you've got some other younger guys. You got a lot of new guys, 8 newcomers. So to have a guy that's going to already be able to step up and be a leader, that goes really far in the locker room, and that goes really far on the court as well. And I think he's going to impact winning in a ton of ways. He was a conference player of the year last year. In the American, he was the co-player of the year, which should be getting more attention, and I don't know why it's not. That's one reason I'm so high on him is that that's a conference player of the year for a conference it's not a slouch. It's not a low major conference. Like the American is a good conference, and for that kind of player of the year to transfer in and be a starter, but also not even be guaranteed to start because of how loaded the roster is, says a lot about this team. And I think there are a whole lot of different things Youngblood can do to affect the game and that he will do to affect the game.
All right, so we'll table Chris Youngblood, but you just made me very, very excited. Maybe the transfer jersey to get will be Chris Youngblood. I mean, not only for the fun name on the back, but for his attitude and how he'll fit into the blue-collar system. Let's talk about the most anticipated transfer. I mean, so much last year. Oh, if this team only had Charles Bediako. Oh, if only had a rim protector. Well, Nate Oates and Preston Murphy go out and basically get the first or second best rim protector in the transfer portal. Let's talk about the big red dog, Cliff Omoruyi. What in the world? How important is he really going to be, not only for the rim protection, but for what he's going to do for Grant Nelson?
I think he is the most important addition that Alabama was able to get. Strictly because you look at last season's team, and honestly, you look at the 2023 team, and like you said, glaring difference. The vacuum, the thing that was missing was a rim protector, a shot blocker, somebody in the middle of the defense, and that's exactly what Cliff Omoruyi is. Not only that, but he is massive. He, I think, is 20 pounds heavier than Charles Bediako. So he's measurements wise, I think Charles was 7 foot 230, if I'm remembering right. Omoruyi's updated measurement is 6'11", 250. And you even see, just check his Instagram and you can see pictures that he posts from practice and he's jacked. Like the dude is massive. And that kind of presence on the interior, just him being there is going to limit opponents' drives to the rim, their attacks, and that's also going to help Alabama in terms of their defense can kind of funnel everything in to Omoruyi. And that kind of just swallows up everything that teams try to do on the interior, not to mention the fact that Alabama got punked by a lot of really good big men last year. Janai Broome had a couple really good games against them. Let's see who else. Ryan Kalkbrenner had a really good game. Zach Edey. I'm blanking on Arizona's big Omar Ballo. All of them had really good games inside, and that's Alabama struggled against those. But that's not going to happen anymore. And now that with Omoruyi inside, he can go one-on-one defensively with probably any big in the country. It's going to be really exciting to see him match up with Broome because I think those are two of the best bigs in the country. But just as far as what he brings, he does all of that defensively and offensively. I think he's going to be a really interesting change because you might remember this when Charles Bediako was around. There was a complaint that he would forget that he could dunk the ball. If you remember back to his days, a lot of times he wouldn't just go up and dunk it. Based on every practice clip that we've seen, Omoruyi dunks literally everything. Like he is understood.
Dante Hall, maybe?
Like similar, but stronger, honestly. Like he has realized that he is bigger than everybody and that he can out-jump everybody. And if he gets it 2 feet from the basket, he's going to jump up and dunk it. He's a good lob finisher also, which helps with Alabama having a lot of talented lob throwers and talented passers. We've seen a lot of clips of Holloway throwing him dunks from practice clips, but with him being able to do that, he's more athletic and more mobile than Charles Bediako. So really, when you're thinking about what he provides, think of Charles Bediako, add 20 pounds, and then add mobility and athleticism. And that's what you get with Omoruyi. He's going to be I don't know if his numbers are going to earn him all SEC type awards, but in terms of impact and what he provides to this Alabama team, especially considering what they were missing a year ago, he's quite possibly the most important add and one of the most important players on the team.
Yeah, and really, everything you said absolutely true, but you really I guess you really I'm blanking on the word, but basically his impact is multiplied. That's what I want. He multiplies his impact because of what he can do for Grant Nelson, moving him. Okay, you don't have to play the 5 here really at all, unless he's on the bench. But he's back to, we saw against North Carolina. We saw several times in the NCAA tournament what Grant Nelson really looks like playing the 4. And I just wonder if Grant going kind of mostly back to the 4 is going to bring a better player or bring more out of Grant Nelson.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely help him, because we did see in the tournament when he was starting at the 4 next to Nick Pringle that he was playing some of the best basketball he played all year. With Grant playing at the 4, you're able to kind of hunt mismatches with smaller 4s from other teams. And I think Grant Nelson's 6'11", 230. Like, he's not a small guy. So your front court is 2 6'11" players. One of them's 250, one of them's 230. That's a lot of those are 2 very large people down low as your 2 bigs. And then also lets Nelson play out on the wing with Omoruyi on the inside if you do kind of a 4-out offense. And we know Nelson can drive. We know he can get downhill. We know he can go from kind of from the wing, drive in towards the paint and post up and do that with smaller defenders. We saw him mismatch hunting like that against North Carolina a whole lot. I think that'll improve Nelson's 3-point shot, because there will be a little more gravity on the inside with Omoruyi. And I just think that's going to free him up a lot. Also defensively, because Nelson, quite frankly, isn't strong enough to deal with a lot of the 5s that he was having to guard a year ago. And so now those duties can be handed off to Omoruyi, and now you have Nelson who can guard 4s on the inside. And it just frees up so much for his game. And I think that's going to be huge for him, especially having a year of adjustment already under his belt to high major basketball. So that's going to make him better. It makes Alabama's defense better. So I agree. It multiplies the impact that he can have, considering where he can play and what that does for other players on Alabama's offense.
All right, we'll take just a couple more minutes with Blake Byler right here on the Joe Gaither Show. Let's hit a couple of these questions. What's the biggest thing out of these 4 guys, just the transferees, what's the biggest thing that you have learned by doing these profiles?
That's a good question. I think it's really interesting to see truly what kind of impact these guys were having early in their careers, because a lot of these guys are transfers. But you see their stats from a year ago, and you're like, okay, that's cool. They were productive a year ago. Naturally, you would expect that. But to go back kind of years in the past and see, I thought it was interesting to know that both Houston Mallette and Chris Youngblood were double-digit scorers as freshmen. And to see the kind of production that these guys have had, they've both been 12-plus point per game scorers every year of their career. And that's probably not going to be the case for both of them, potentially either of them this year, with how loaded the roster is. But these are guys who have been incredibly productive at their previous spots. They're all coming together on this team and are willing to take smaller roles. I think that's the other thing, is that a lot of these guys, they know what they're getting into. There's a lot of talk about, there's only one ball. There's so many guys that aren't going to be able to share the ball or have the right attitude or whatever. But all of these guys kind of knew what they were getting into, and they knew the possibility of all of these guys being back. And so whenever they all show up and they're all ready to play, like, we know these guys have been productive in the past, but they're kind of setting that aside for the good of coming to a major program and trying to win championships at multiple levels. And so I think that's one major thing I learned, is how productive these guys have kind of been throughout their whole career. And it wasn't just they kind of blew up and came onto the scene this past year. This has been a slow progression of these guys being really talented and really productive basketball players.
All right, and of these 4 basketball players, the transferees, who would you tab as the most underrated addition to this roster?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit, but I think it's Chris Youngblood still. And I just think that's because he's not getting all of the attention, because he's not as flashy as Omoruyi in terms of like a splash ad. And then Holloway obviously got all of the attention for going from Auburn to Alabama and being a former 5-star and whatever. But I think the 5th year conference player of the year that, like I touched on earlier, can do everything that he can do from defending to shooting. All of that is going to make him a really important player, not to mention his leadership, like I touched on earlier. So I think he's the most important and definitely the most underrated ad as far as these 4 transfers go. I think that's definitely Chris Youngblood.
All right. Abby wanted to get involved in the conversation. Planes flying overhead over here in Northport. Let's talk about the next 4 weeks. The next 4 weeks, you're going to be looking at the freshmen. And I know you put out a poll at Blake Byler 45, kind of which guy you wanted to see first. Let's just lay out the next 4 weeks. Who are you most excited to write about? Who are we going to see tomorrow morning on BamaCentral.com? And kind of your thoughts on the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, so tomorrow is going to be Darion Reed, who was the highest rated player in the class. And he is this might surprise some people, but he's the second highest ranked recruit of all time in terms of since 24/7 started tracking it. And so on there, since probably around 2000, when they really started tracking recruits and giving them ratings and everything like that, and saving their database and everything, he ranks right behind Colin Sexton and right in front of Brandon Miller. And that's a high bar. And those are 2 guys who went in the top 10 of the NBA draft and 2 guys who made massive impacts in their 1 years at Alabama. So I think he's going to be really interesting. That's who we're diving into tomorrow. He spent some of his summer playing for Team USA's under-18 team. So I've got some film from that we've looked at and kind of seeing his impact. And then remind me what was your other question?
Really just kind of what you're excited about with these 4 freshmen.
Oh, yeah. I'm really excited. One of the freshmen I'm really excited to look at is Aiden Sherrell, just because I think he has a really unique skill set as far as a 6'10", 6'11" big man who can shoot 3. I'm really excited to dive into him. And then honestly, all of these guys are really unique. Like they all have very unique builds, very unique skill sets. Darion Reed is kind of a bigger slasher type forward that finishes really well inside. Sherrell is kind of a stretch 5. LeBaron Philon is a really explosive guard. And then Nas Cunningham is a really rangy shot creating wing. And so this recruiting class is really cool because it's a lot of different types of players, different archetypes that will all fit into the team differently. And so it's going to be a lot of trying to dive in and see where they do fit with all of these different skill sets.
Well, we're going to have you back on when you're done with all the freshmen, but we'll get you out of here on this. Still no news on the 3rd assistant coach, or do you have any insight on a timeline or on a candidate or 3, or what's the latest on a 3rd Alabama assistant coach?
Yeah, I really have no idea, honestly. We haven't heard anything. There haven't been any rumors. Nothing's really floating around. Honestly, I don't know if they're just not going to hire one. I don't know if that's an option. When you look at the roster online and it shows the coaching staff, it shows 3 guys. It shows Oates and Murphy and Pannone. So I don't know if they're rolling with those 3 guys and they're putting the money elsewhere. I really have no idea. It's going to be a wait and see kind of game. I feel like it was a little later in the summer last season when Murphy got hired. I feel like he got hired in July. So if we get through July and have no news, maybe they're not going to hire one. But I would let the summer play out, and we'll kind of see where it goes.
Make sure you follow Blake Byler on the Twitter machine at Blake Byler 45 and read all of his great work at BamaCentral.com. Blake, 4th of July tomorrow. What's the go-to 4th of July food for the Byler household?
Probably burgers. We like to grill a lot of burgers. It's going to be fun. Always good to enjoy the day outside, enjoy the sun, grill some food. It'll be fun.
Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy your burgers and enjoy the day. We appreciate your time, Blake.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Yes, sir. That's Blake Byler joining us, and I went a little bit over his time, so I appreciate him giving me his time right here on the Joe Gaither Show. Always got to catch up and keep the basketball excitement very, very high. I know football is 59 days away, but goodness gracious, basketball is coming around the corner, and I cannot wait for this basketball season. We appreciate everybody who's watched us today on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You watched us at Joe Gaither 6 on your favorite social media machine, or you watched us on the Bama Central YouTube YouTube channel. So we appreciate everybody who's subscribing to the Bama Central YouTube channel. We will get out to SEC Media Days in about 2 weeks in Dallas. So there's going to be a lot of other visual things instead of my face on the Bama Central YouTube channel, and that will be very good for that channel. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon, and we will be back. We will be back. I know it's 4th of July, but I will have a short little 30-minute episode or so tomorrow morning talking, I don't know what. We'll figure it out over the next 24 hours, but we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of the Joe Gaither Show right here on Bama Central and BamaCentral.com.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of the Joe Gaither Show on Bama Central. Keep up with Joe on all his social media pages at Joe Gaither6. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to read us daily at BamaCentral.com.